So today I want to review the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, and this is definitely one of the most controversial movies of all time. And also, a lot of people don't know that this is actually a screenplay written by Quentin Tarantino. He also wrote True Romance and a few other screenplays in the 1990s. Like he did True Romance, and then he also did Natural Born Killers. Like he wrote the scripts for it, but he was able to sell them because Reservoir Dogs got really, really popular. And actually, he was very, very lucky that he did not turn this into a movie, because in 1994 he did Pulp Fiction, and after he did that, then he was kind of marked as one of the great American directors. But also Pulp Fiction really established him as one of the great American screenplay writers. But this film was directed by Oliver Stone, who did Talk Radio, which is one of my favorite films of all time. He also did Platoon, which is probably his most famous film. Then Born on the Fourth of July, Nixon, and JFK, and other films like that. So he's definitely one of the best directors, and definitely in Natural Born Killers, it is one of the most controversial films ever made. There's actually a story that the Columbine shooters were inspired by the film, but it's one of those things that obviously, if people are inspired by violent movies to do violent things, you can't blame those movies. You have to blame the people, because if not, then as Anthony Burgess, who wrote A Clockwork Orange, said, is that if you want to ban things because they influence people to commit violence, start with the Bible, because the Bible has influenced more acts of violence in history than any other piece of media. So, Natural Born Killers is about like these two psychotic serial killers who have very abusive pasts, and they go around the Southwest committing crimes. And what happens is that as they kill people, they always leave people. If they kill a group of people, they always just leave one person behind to tell their story, and later on they end up in jail, and later on there's an end result to that. So first of all, I would kind of say that their acting is really good. It's Woody Harrelson and another actress, and they do a good job of just being psychotic through the movie. And also, there's a lot of great storytelling. A lot of the times in movies, they could do cut away to black and white, or they do cut away to animation, or they do kind of cut away to flashing colors or clips from old films, because it's trying to tell you like how society at that time was very obsessed with the media and violence in the media. And sometimes what happened was that obviously there were serial killers and other people wanting to be on television or wanting to be talked about because of their violent actions, because they were getting attention. Like, for example, a lot of people would say that Charlie Manson was like one of the first famous examples of that. Like, he wanted all the attention that he was getting, so that inspired him to kind of influence doing bad things. And even like when people talk about Columbine, a lot of people say like that may have been done for attention, or sometimes people do commit crimes to get attention, and sometimes that could be social media attention, that could be attention on TV, or or it could be countries like Russia or whatever that's doing crimes in the Ukraine right now, saying that, okay, well, I'm doing this so the world knows not to fuck with me. So people can use media as a way of putting bad in the world or hurting people and saying, you know what, I'm the one not to fuck with, and I want everybody to show just to see what I can do. So it does kind of like satirize that. And I also think that Mickey and Mallory are very complicated characters. I think, unfortunately, I'm not sure about Mickey, but I think it's kind of revealed they had sexually abusive relationship with his father. But it's definitely very clear that Mallory had a very sexually abusive relationship with her father, who's portrayed by Rodney Dangerfield. And it definitely, like, one of the things that happen out of sexual abuse or emotional abuse and physical abuse, because she suffers from all three, is that you can have a personality that wants attention. So maybe she's inspired to kind of just do all these crimes because she wants attention. She's inspired to be a violent person because she wants attention, or she feels that, well, people cross lines with me, I'm going to cross lines with other people. And then also the same thing, with her sexuality, that, she in some scenes she kind of like asks other men to have sex with her, She's not good with her boundaries, and she's also not good with accountability for her actions. So there's always a huge sense of putting herself in bad situations or hurting the people that she wants to hurt, and maybe vicariously that's her way of hurting her father when she wanted to hurt him because he was sexually abusive. Mickey's story. I watched most of the film, but I got kind of bored at the end. But he was interviewed in prison. I think they did talk about his childhood, and they did talk about his childhood, but I don't really remember it. And I think he was sexually abused as a kid, and there's a story that he may have murdered his father. So if those things are true, it's the same thing. That obviously all of his violence is inflicted by the pain of being sexually abused, and then also the way he took it for himself is killing his father. So that can kind of trigger his murderous rampage, where it's just like, again, like where the violence he inflicts on others is him just wanting to make catharsis for the abuse that his father did to him, which is very sad. And that does happen to people that, sometimes, we choose to be horrible people because horrible things happen to us. When I grew up, my parents were very verbally abusive. And I always remember, like, sometimes my parents would flip the fuck out. And sometimes, I was misdiagnosed with autism. So I know, like, sometimes I've got my balls busted for having autism when I didn't, or when I got things wrong, or when I screwed up in school, I would always be shamed. Or my parents would bust my balls about having autism. So I remember how, when I was in high school, I used to use, a lot of just very emotionally abusive language and, very, like, heavy language that, I don't have the courage to tell you what those words were or whatever, but I remember how I used to be that way, because I wanted the attention, and I also kind of wanted to, just be irresponsible and violent with my words the same way I kind of got that. But also sometimes you learn that two wrongs don't make a right. And that's the kind of thing with Mickey and Valerie Knox, that's not in their brains to just understand that, okay, well, horrible things happen to them. It shouldn't inspire you to be a horrible person. And then also, when things happen to you where people cross lines and it's either like sexual, emotional, and psychological abuse growing up, there's no excuse to turn into a person that is a psychopath. And if media and whatever is getting you the attention, you're more of a dangerous person, because now you're not just fueled by emoting your feelings on other people. You're also just motivated by just the attention. And I think that's kind of what it is that they're both committing crimes because they're hurting inside from their abusive childhoods. But also the media is kind of almost like the mommy and daddy and attention that they've wanted to feel complete. Like look at Tony Soprano. One of the reasons why he tries to defend his mother in old age, like the reason why he flipped out at the therapist's office, and because she was saying, like, he has borderline. His mother had maybe a borderline personality disorder, or the reason why he was in denial about the type of person his mother was, because he actually wanted his mother's approval, and that would have made him feel complete. I think that when I was younger, I didn't have a mom growing up, and I found that my mom was very physically, emotionally, and abusive and neglectful. So I remember, like, always wanting to be in relationship with a woman to kind of have, my mommy needs met. Or, I didn't get along with my parents, so, I have two dads. So, I've always wanted to I remember, like, having a very verbally abusive and abusive boss, when I graduated college and worked at Conway, and I was kind of like more attracted to bosses or men that were abusive and bullying me, because I kind of felt that I deserved that for some reason, because that's kind of what I felt was appropriate when I grew up. But as I've learned is that, obviously we all have wounds, and sometimes our wounds can inspire us to be horrible people. And you see that in Natural Born Killers, but you still have to be a good person to yourself and others. Another example is 48 Hour Film Project, that I had some disagreement with some city producers, and I was ranting and raving and not letting some things go. And to me, that was kind of my way of standing up for myself, because I've learned a lot of times in my life that whenever I get bullied or whatever, that, it's unfortunate to move on. Like, for example, at my old job, when I worked at Conway, not only did I have a bully manager, the store was robbed by its own security guards. I was almost murdered by the police. I suffered from trauma, and I was kind of just told by my family, my counselor, just what are you gonna do about it? You need to move on and whatever. When actually I suffered from real trauma and suicide and depression, I've not really told anybody about that publicly until recently, because those are heavy things, and also I was kind of afraid to say anything at the time because I didn't want to be put in a mental institution, and medication is the only option. Medication is the only option when you're hurt. So so I think that's what I feel about Mallory and Mickey Knox, is that they're people who have had very, very abusive childhoods. They are trying to get attention from the media to kind of cope with their psychological problems, and unfortunately they're doing it in very unhealthy ways. And sometimes that is true about television, that it is a fantasy world. And definitely in the 90s, there were a lot of kids wanting to be in boy bands. There were a lot of kids wanting to be in professional wrestling. There was a lot of kids, just saying, I want to be a TV star or movie star. And sometimes people just did it as a way to kind of escape and cope with their problems. And sometimes, there are people who are violent and just have a lot of issues. And they may say, I'm going to take some ideas from television and be inspired to be a violent person. I think a great example is Robert De Niro's character in Taxi Driver. Because in Taxi Driver, he watches television, he hears messages like it's time for the people to take over the streets, and stands up. And he kind of gets the idea that he either needs to kill a politician or he needs to kill a bunch of mafiosos to save a girl. And like they say in Taxi Driver, even though he saved Jodie Foster's character, it wasn't the right move because he actually re-traumatized her. There was a better way to handle it, like call the cops or even like get audio recording, just to kind of like say that this is a very serious issue, instead of just shooting a bunch of people and re-traumatizing her. Because he didn't care about her. He cared more about, the hero's journey and his convoluted head. So, I think importantly, media is a very, very powerful thing. And I think sometimes when there are people who are mentally ill or come from trauma, or they have documented mental illness, or they come from a lot of stigmas around mental illness, like, okay, if you are mentally ill, you're either a psycho or you're retarded or whatever, it becomes harder for people to get help. And when that happens, usually you can have a situation like you see Natural Born Killers, like two psychotic people that clearly needed a lot of counseling and just a lot of understanding that just because two wrongs don't make a right, just because you have all this violence and psychotic behavior because you grew up around violent and psychotic and sociopathic behavior, doesn't give you the right to kind of go on a killing spree, nor does it give the right to kill the people that have hurt you, even though that can be understandable and justifiable in a lot of different mindsets. But to me, there's a lot of themes within this film, but I do think that the theme that I'm talking about is just like how, toxic mental health, undocumented mental health, and trying to get attention from the media as coping mechanisms always leads to a disaster. So people who are hurting and going through trauma, you have to understand that you are hurting and you need psychological help, and you have to work hard on finding the right people for you. Like, I worked with a therapist. He helped me out. He taught me accountability from life. Those were the things that I need to learn. But he was a poor psychologist when it came to trauma, because obviously, if you almost get murdered at your job, you're thrown up when you get home from work. I've told him some really hard stories that of just different inappropriate things that happened to me growing up. I've also told him, about how I got in touch with my biological father last year, how I read some paperwork saying that I wasn't autistic. That was more kind of embellished so I would get adopted because my parents were a gay couple. All those things hurt me and made me feel very furious and angry. But when he was kind of telling me, you need to find a way to get over it. To me, that's when I moved on, because I realized that, again, you become like Mickey and Valerie Knox. You're having that whole entire suck it up, get over it, or let's not process this, or not looking for help. What happens is eventually you become a ticking time bomb, and they're the results of being time bombs because because they've not gotten the help that they needed, nor I don't think they have the education to understand that's the way to save their lives, instead of just all this destruction and tragedy and misery that they bring on other people and then themselves. And ultimately, they're a fad, but they're not going to last forever. You can be as good as a gunslinger as Mickey and as good as a fighter as a Mallory, but you can't fight the whole world. Um, and there's such a thing as people being too dangerous to keep alive, so they could easily just implement that the next time they get caught by the police. So you're responsible for being your own tragedy. You're responsible for what you put in the world. You're responsible for looking at television, media, and social media and internet and whatever to be inspired to put your shit out there. And that's what they kind of done. They put all their anger and frustration out there because they're just attention seeking, because they're hurting inside. And that's kind of how I really psychologically analyze these characters. Two trauma victims that just want attention and want to kind of emote all the violence and pent up anger that they feel, and also the fact that they don't care about the lives that they destroy is kind of a way of saying, you know what, when they were forced to have sex or they're in emotionally abusive or physically abusive situations, their feelings weren't thought about. So they're kind of doing that onto the people that they're hurting, which is sad and unfortunate. Because two wrongs don't make it right. Because evil happened to you does not mean you put evil into the world. And also, if you're motivated by media and other things to put evil in the world, you're actually convoluted, because it's not media that should be accountable for media can never be accountable for your actions. And that's one of the main messages of that movie.